Hello once again, everybody, and thank you for joining me here on this Thursday, October 1st edition of ATS Radio. I am your host, Adam Burke. I'll be joined today by professional bettor and handicapper Brad Powers from BradPowersSports.com. It is already week 5 of the college football season. We'll talk about a lot of that and also a lot of week 4 in the NFL as we go along here. Over at ATS.io, lots of picks and predictions. We got NBA Finals coverage. We got bunch of stuff for this weekend in college football and the NFL. Still covering the Major League Baseball playoffs as well. I like to think that they end when my Indians get knocked out, but that's not really the way that it goes. We're still covering that over at the website, along with the top sportsbook promotions for this weekend across the United States. We got sportsbook reviews for all of the different operators that are out there. DraftKings, BetMGM, FanDuel, PointsBet, William Hill, all of them that are out there, Bet Rivers. We got all that coverage over at ATS.io for you to check out. And, of course, we're on 4 days a week here on ATS Radio. Mondays with Kyle Hunter. Tuesdays, myself doing the Bettors Box, and also Brian Blessing talking the NFL. Thursdays here with Brad Powers. And then on Fridays, my picks for the Circa Sports Million. I'll talk about those coming up on tomorrow's show. But before we get to that, we've got this Thursday edition of the podcast, and that's with with Brad Powers, professional handicapper from BradPowersSports.com. Brad, how's it going today, man?
It's going well. How you doing on this fine Thursday?
I've been better. Late night last night with the Indians game, just excruciating way to lose, which I guess I probably should have come to expect. But you know, the calendar flips forward here. We're into the month of October, and I'm just gonna, drown my sorrows in suburban every night now for the rest of the fall.
I hear you, man. I feel you. At least it was a short season to feel that. I mean, I don't know what you could have expected this year, to be honest with you.
Speaking of not really knowing what to expect, you and I were talking about this before we started recording here with regards to updating our power ratings on a weekly basis. And, we've had some performances at opposite ends of the spectrum for some of these teams. We've seen a lot of volatility in the betting markets for a variety of different reasons. It's never easy to update power ratings because it is an inexact science, but this year, with so many external factors, it feels a lot more difficult.
Absolutely, a lot more difficult. And while to me it's still a starting off point as far as the handicap goes, typically, I put a lot more emphasis to my power ratings than what I have so far this college football season. If a line's off 3-4 points, I mean, of course, I'll start diving into finding out why it is that. But, in other instances where it's almost fire immediately, I'm not necessarily the case this year. I'm finding myself moving teams up 3, 4, 5 points one week, down 3, 4, 5 points the next week. I mean, a lot of teams like that. And it's just usually, obviously a lot of teams haven't played all, 3, 4 games like we normally see this time of year. But usually by the time October rolls around, I'm not adjusting teams 2, 3, 4, 5 points after each and every game.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that I've always noticed between you and I that are different with our sets of power ratings. And even though I trust my numbers to a degree, I'm always going to give you the benefit of the doubt as somebody who I feel like is very good, at power ratings, at making those adjustments, stuff like that. There will be games, even deeper into the season where I've got, 4, 5, 6 points difference, and you generally don't have more than maybe a game or two where you're more than 2.5 points off from the market. And, when you're 2.5 points off, you fire. When I'm 2.5 points off, I kind of wait and sort of see where the market winds up going. And I think that kind of speaks to what's happening this season, where I've had some games this week and last week where I've been several points off the market. The lines have generally moved in my direction, so I'm thankful for that. But it is weird to hear you say that you've had, maybe some games that are 4, 4.5, 5 points off. Even, I don't want to say this deep into the season because a lot of teams don't have a lot of data points, but still, it's tough to make those adjustments.
It is. And, where's the consistency at for a lot of these teams? You mentioned Kansas State. I mean, a team that their head coach said, I don't even know if I could have fielded a team until Friday evening. And then you watch the game, and the first 40 minutes of the game basically plays out as expected. Oklahoma's up 3 touchdowns, laying 4 touchdowns, and then boom, bang. I mean, a few turnovers, and you get an outright upset. So inconsistency. And then you look at like a Virginia Tech team, ravaged by COVID, couldn't practice. 20-some players out, including their starting quarterback, 4 assistant coaches out, including their defensive coordinator that's replacing a legend this year in Bud Foster. And yet, boom, bang, 10 minutes in the game at 17-0 Virginia Tech after the line moves 5-6 points, and I'm on NC State. I'm feeling good. It's just you just shrug your shoulders sometimes at what's going on right now.
It is a challenge, and obviously these players have a lot of things to worry about. You're not getting that full college athletics experience this year because you're under a lot of strict protocols, and maybe that's having an impact on the players. Maybe not having to go to class in person at some of these schools having an impact. Coaching obviously having a significant impact across the board. It's tough because we've talked about this a lot week after week, where if you've got value with your numbers relative to the market number, you want to play it because that's what you do to make money here in this business. But as you said, you start kind of second guessing yourself of, why am I so far off from the market? What am I missing? Is there something that I haven't properly accounted for? And I think the one thing that we can rely on, and we talked about several of these on Monday, is the box score study and looking at some of those misleading scores, looking for regression to the mean, trying to get out in front of some line moves that way. But even still, just the Jekyll and Hyde act for some of these teams is a challenge.
Yeah, box scores are great. So normally I like playing on teams with turnover, problems or from the previous game. Hey, that led into some misleading finals, and I usually find value betting on or against that team the following week. But in this year, I gotta say, like Duke, a team, it turns it over 4 or 5 times one game, turns right around the next game and turns it over 7 times. Georgia Tech with a ton of turnovers each and every game. You think there's some value on them, and yet they consistently turn it over like that. That's something you normally don't see in a typical football season. Teams turning it over at a rate like that consistently week after week. So that was just another instance where, this year's a little bit unique, where normally I'm finding value in the box score. With those particular teams, I'm not, at least so far.
Well, and that's the big question, and I've posed this question a few times here on the show, and I think, once again, this is another, prototypical week to do it, is, we expect things to improve. We expect teams to perform, to their expectations. But in this COVID year, and with so many things going on, a lot of kids missing practice for one reason or another, stuff like that, I think you do run into this question of, how much improvement can we actually expect from one week to the next? And you and I have talked about this a lot already here this morning before we started recording. This Friday night game between Louisiana Tech and BYU, we echoed the same sentiments when we were talking before we started recording here that Kyle Hunter and I did on Monday. We have Louisiana Tech and Troy all power rated pretty evenly. Yep. This line is 10 points higher than the line was against Troy last week. And I understand La Tech, short week, going to altitude, stuff like that. Maybe that wasn't factored in enough last week with Troy, but it's not 10 points worth of factoring. But you've got a BYU team here that has looked the part, that has been very impressive, that people feel like they can trust. And this line is high. And I think this line does ultimately come down. But this line is high to you. This line is high to me. It was high to Kyle. I'm sure a lot of other people that do power ratings view this line as being too high, and it hasn't moved down yet. And I think that sort of speaks to maybe the hesitance, maybe the uncertainty that we have. Yep. But it's, that's just one game on the slate for this week, but it sort of encapsulates so much of what's going on.
Absolutely. I have my own personal hesitancy, and, typically I'd be firing away Louisiana Tech bet after bet at plus 24 and even some 20. I did see some 24.5s, and they were gobbled up immediately on La Tech. So maybe, we're at a point now where, I agree with you. I think it will come down a little bit. Although the public's going to get involved on Friday night betting a football game, and they're going to want to lay it with BYU because they just watched them crush a couple teams. So maybe it just stays. But I can tell you from guys like myself, there is a hesitancy, and I'm seeing it reflected in the market. And especially this week, other than a few games, haven't seen too much line movement, particularly on the side so far this week.
Well, and I think it's interesting, too, we talk about the circa openers, and we talk about, a lot of the closing line value that you've lost because of games that have been canceled, but you've hit a lot of those games early in the week. Generally speaking, you've had a lot of success tapping into that market, and you were telling me before we started recording here today that you've played a lot more totals than sides, and I wonder if, either consciously or subconsciously, it just feels like the totals market right now, with all the inconsistency that we've already discussed, is just an easier market to attack this season.
Yeah, I would say at least, obviously, I think it's going to hold true in any college football season. Total is going to be a softer market than sides. But usually, when it comes Sunday, I'm firing on a couple totals that I think are really mispriced in the market. But I really don't do a lot of my totals work until midweek. I love betting on weather. I just don't think the market ever properly accounts for weather. So, but in this instance, I didn't see a ton of value on the sides. And again, I'm typically, when it comes to Circa World Openers, I'm firing away 5, 6, 8, 10 side bets. And it was not the case this week. It was 10 totals and 3 sides. I bet 13 plays on Circa on Sunday morning, and that was it. And one thing I want to add is, with them opening up the limits a little bit, 2K on sides, 1K on totals, market's going to be shaped up a little bit on Sunday, and that's unfortunate for everybody else that isn't betting on Sunday and is waiting until midweek, game day, whatever. Maybe that's why we haven't seen as much movement so far in the market this week. Those things are getting shaped up very early. That's unfortunate for 90+% of the people betting out there.
Yeah, that's an excellent point, because, when you think about the sports betting market as a whole, there are very few originators out there. There are a lot of copycat sports books that just see what happens in the market, wait for the market to settle in, then go ahead and post their numbers. And we do still get some movement Monday morning as the West Coast crowd kind of gets going a little bit, as there are more options available with the different sports books. But, it's one of those things where there are so few originators, and there are, there's what? You were telling me this before the show. Those lines that open up at Circa are maybe there 30 seconds to a minute. Everyone's just kind of preying on numbers that they expect to open, off market from where they feel they should be. And that's the one thing about this business. And look, I will always tell people that getting line value is important. I will always tell people that beating the close is very important. But when you hear these people sit there and proselytize to you, get the best number, one person, maybe two in the entire world, sometimes get the best number on that game. So it's about getting the best number that you can.
Yes.
Don't settle for the close. Try to read the market the correct way, because, like you said, the market now is being shaped effectively by one sports book that opens globally at Circa Sports, and then other books will kind of maybe shade a little bit towards what they expect to need. But everyone's just going to copy those numbers, and then we'll see what happens throughout the week. But it is tough to get, what is perceived to be line value out there nowadays.
Absolutely. And I want to emphasize what you said. Get the absolute best number that you can, whether that's, shopping around on game day, having a bunch of different choices. That's the easiest way to get the best number is to have multiple outs. No matter if you're betting on Monday or you're betting on game day on Saturday or Sunday for college and the NFL, that's the best way to get the best number. But if you are able to bet earlier in the week, having multiple outs and understanding where the market is going to go, certainly I can give you out a bunch of picks. I can win a bunch one year, lose a bunch another year. But I think that is that is probably the strongest point I could ever make. And, getting the best number that you can and identifying and reading the market and having multiple outs. If you want to become a winning bettor, that's probably the secret to it all. But the unfortunate thing is, it's going to be a lot tougher to get those numbers if you got books like Circa, and I'm happy that they do it. But problem is, it's good for me. It's not necessarily good for everybody else.
Yeah, but that is an excellent point, having multiple outs, and it is something that I talk about a lot over at ats.io. And one of the reasons why we have all the sportsbook reviews of all the different places that are out there, half points matter. 5 cents worth of juice matters. It all helps your bottom line. And I know people say, well, there's no value on a losing bet and this and that. But the best indicator that we have of future success is getting the best of the number. It's getting out there, reading the market properly, and giving yourself the best possible chance. Because the fact of the matter is that all we can control is the number that we get. Whatever happens during that game, we're not playing. We're not out there. We're not making decisions. We're not calling plays. All you can control is getting the best possible number, and having multiple sports books, multiple outs, as they say, is definitely an important part of the process. But, that's something that I think a lot of people just have such a hard time grasping is, and I saw this, somebody shared, I think it was Andy Molitor at Andy MSFW on Twitter. He's a very good follow, but he shared an article from Pinnacle, one of the, global offshore sports books that said, look, having sports knowledge doesn't necessarily help you when it comes to betting. It's the market that you have to understand.
Yeah.
And that's something I think a lot of recreational bettors just don't really grasp, especially in this new frontier of legal U.S. sports betting. And that's why I've always tried to focus a lot on those types of things with my content, with the discussions that we've had here. And, I hope as this continues to grow and as it's got more mainstream coverage that, some of the people out there that have the big platforms focus on these things too.
I would hope that's the case, but I don't think we're trending in that direction. Adam, it's all about picks and all about perceived winners and not necessarily about the value. I mean, that's just the world we're going to be living in, I think.
Yeah, I think so too. And speaking of value here, a few games we want to talk about on the Week 5 college football card. We will have a few highlight videos coming up for you here. But game 107-108, Brad, is a game that's starting to light up on the board here, a game I'm kind of watching pretty closely because I am a Gamecocks fan by marriage. South Carolina takes on Florida here, and this number was 18, and now we're starting to see a little bit of that South Carolina money leak into the market with a drop down to 17.5. We're not talking about key numbers in the double-digit range, but we're starting to see that Gamecocks money show up a little bit.
I agree with it. Pure number for me, 16.5. Obviously, Florida looked very impressive offensively last week. I mean, I'll say it, and I'll die on this hill, but I'm not a huge Kyle Trask fan. Although he looked the part last week, but I think the guy that looked the part was the tight end he was throwing it to, Kyle Pitts. It was just a matchup nightmare for anybody pretty much in college football. So we'll see how that plays out. I mean, South Carolina lost the game against Tennessee, but I pretty much played out to expectation as far as the line goes. But I came away impressed, especially offensively. I thought they were more than adequate. I mean, they looked like they had a pretty solid game plan. Got a great guy in Shi Smith at wide receiver. Again, early start, laying a big number with a Florida defense that did give up 600-plus yards against Ole Miss and easily could have given up the back door there. I'm not saying South Carolina's offense is as good as Ole Miss, but I think their defense is better than Ole Miss's. Therefore, I mean, I'm going to bet the Gamecocks here, anything above 17.
Well, so look at the total for this one. 57, the prevailing number out there, seeing some 57.5s. And this total feels like a little bit of a function of last week's Florida game and also the South Carolina game, because we talked about it on the show last week, and we did a highlight video on Monday last week where we talked about betting the under. It was under 48 at the time. Under came down to what, 44.5 for that game? And it flew over the total, but it was one where there was a lot of under money, and the game went over. Florida and Ole Miss, tons of points, tons of yards in that one. 57.5 is probably a little bit high here for this total. But, again, as we talked about in the open for today's show, there's so much inconsistency offensively, defensively. Maybe the tackling is just bad in college football right now, stuff like that. I'm not going to step in front of it, and it has gone up a little bit. But those are some overreactions you want to keep an eye on as we get more of these SEC data points.
Absolutely. I thought the opener was low. I bet it. That was one of the circuit totals bets that I made was over. I think it's 53.5. I went over. I made the line 57. That's where it's at now as far as the totals goes. But, I mean,
so
again,
it's not an overreaction. It's just a good adjustment.
I think it's just a good adjustment. I don't think it's an overreaction. I mean, overreaction would push it to 60. That would be the overreaction. Maybe we'll see that from the public. Oh, I mean, I just watched Florida put up, a game at 86 points, and boy, South Carolina and Tennessee was at 58. I mean, boy, do the math there. This total should be in the 60s. Bet over. I mean, that'll be the adjustment maybe on Saturday. But right now, I think it's a proper adjustment at the current number.
Did you notice anything tempo-wise with either team last week that, maybe they're playing a little bit faster?
No, I didn't tempo-wise, but man, I thought both were pretty efficient offensively. That was a surprise for me, how efficient they were with limited practice time and everything that was going on. That was, especially South Carolina with a brand new offensive coordinator and a different scheme. They looked awfully efficient to me, and there was nothing fluky really as far as them getting some yardage against a pretty good Tennessee defense. I guess the most shocking thing to me was how inept Florida's defense was, but maybe chalk it up to Ole Miss is going to be good offensively this year. And, Lane Kiffin had a pretty good, solid game plan there.
Let's stay in the SEC for a minute. Talk about game 115-116 here. Missouri takes on Tennessee. This one's gone up a little bit. Tennessee opened in the 10 range. They're now up to 12, 12 and a half, starting to pop, even a rogue 13 out there in the marketplace at some places. And these are always interesting games to me. We talked about this last week with regards to the Texans, where I wound up taking the Texans against Pittsburgh because I'm like, look, they played Baltimore and Kansas City. Like, Pittsburgh's a good team. Defensively, they're good, but this is a step down for Houston. They played a good first half. I got Bill O'Brien in the second half. Missouri played Alabama last week. Obviously, a very, very good team. Number 1 or number 2 in pretty much everybody's power ratings. Tennessee played a South Carolina team that I think a lot of people feel is kind of middle of the road. And they, had a pick 6. They won that game by 4. As you said, kind of played to the expectation, at least from a side standpoint. Do you agree with this Tennessee line going up?
I had it 10.5. So, 10, 11, fine with me. With it going up now, I don't. I'm not anxious to bet Tennessee. I certainly don't want a Tennessee ticket right now. If anything, if it goes to 13, I'd lean Missouri. And reason is specifically what I saw last week. And what I saw was no waving the white flag for Eli Drinkwitz. It was using all 3 of my timeouts on the final drive against Alabama, going down the field, getting that final score. That was competing for a whole 60 minutes here. And I thought both of their quarterbacks looked okay considering they're playing a top 5 defense in the country in Alabama. So I just like the fight that they showed last week. So, I don't understand the move here towards Tennessee.
That's an excellent point about Drinkwitz and about, playing it out. And especially, too, in a game where, look, these kids aren't idiots. I'm sure they say all the right things before games, but, you're probably not beating Alabama. You're probably not beating Alabama, especially in the season opener. But using timeouts, playing it out, I think that sends a really positive message to your team, especially as a first-year head coach. So while all of us think Tennessee will be better this year because Jeremy Pruitt's done a fantastic job recruiting there, they started to put something together at the end of last season, I think that, this may be a spot where there could come a point, and it's probably Saturday, morning with an early kickoff here in Knoxville, that maybe Missouri is the value side. And, those are sometimes the tough bets that you have to take instead of, going with that wisdom of crowds mentality.
Absolutely. What I did take, this is another over, I bet. I thought too low opener at Circa was like 44, went over. Again, I thought both offenses overachieved. And again, there was one fluky score, and you mentioned in Tennessee, South Carolina. But again, the Missouri fighting, clawing, and scratching until the bitter end. I thought 44 was too low for an opener. They're treating some of these SEC games like it's back in 2005 and not 2020.
All right, we'll step away from the SEC here for a second. We will come back for a couple of highlight videos here. But I do want to get your thoughts on game 123, 124, Oklahoma and Iowa State. Again, another game we talked about on Monday, but one of the things I like to do for any of the new ATS radio listeners out there that didn't transition over from where we were at Bang the Book, I really like to crowdsource opinions and get different thoughts on some of the games, specifically the games that are kind of the marquee matchups here. Oklahoma 7 market wide, total 63, anywhere from 62.5 to 63.5 for this one. Iowa State, one really ugly data point against Louisiana. Did come away with the win last week against TCU, but it was kind of a game that was sort of all over the place. Oklahoma, look, maybe Kansas State is just their kryptonite for one reason or another.
Maybe. I chalked it up more fluke things would happen in the final 20 minutes of the game. First 40 minutes of the game, played to expectation. Oklahoma's up 35-14. I'm not even watching the game. I'm watching other things that are more pertinent to my personal betting and also more competitive. And then boom, bang, went within 15, 20 minutes times. I moved my main TV over to that game, and it was all about turnovers, block punts. Kansas State certainly in the final 4 possessions looked like the better team, but I'm not going to overreact to that when Oklahoma just had some bad turnovers with a young quarterback. To me, the pure power rating is close to the number. I just think Spot says Oklahoma here off a loss, and I tweeted this out earlier in the week. Oklahoma in the regular season hasn't lost back-to-back games since 1999. Bob Stoops' first season. 1999, last time Oklahoma lost back-to-back. I know we're dealing with a 7-point spread here, but 34-0 straight up. And also against the spread, 23-10-1, covering by nearly double digits per game. I just think it's a good spot for Oklahoma here. I mean, if they close that game out, don't have a couple turnovers against Kansas State, even if they win the game by 14, don't even cover a 4-touchdown spread, this line's close to 10. Overreaction, Oklahoma's a play for me.
My line is 10 on the game. So I agree with everything that you're saying there. And that's the thing. Oklahoma was -4 in turnover margin. I mean, Kansas State had 10 first downs and scored 38 points. That just doesn't happen. That's why box score study can be pretty important here. And I'm not saying that this line move is necessarily, an overreaction to Oklahoma losing or people ignoring the box score or something like that. There were a lot of people that did like Iowa State coming into the year, that do like Brock Purdy, that do like Matt Campbell, that aren't sure about Spencer Rattler. But to me, I think Oklahoma is the play here. And, I had other things going on. I didn't catch the 6.5s that were out there. I hope one comes back. I don't know if it will, but I do like Oklahoma in this spot for sure.
Yeah, I'll say this. I mean, I've watched a lot of Iowa State football now the last 4 or 5 games. I'm jumping off the Matt Campbell and Brock Purdy bandwagon. I mean, I still think they're solid, but I'm not, Matt Campbell I like a little bit more than Brock Purdy. Brock Purdy is not getting any better. I think Brock Purdy sucks, actually. I mean, he's okay, but he's not getting any better. I mean, he showed, a lot of flashes as a true freshman. Had an okay season last year, but I watched every single play of the Notre Dame game, consistently turning the football over in that one that cost him, just not good enough. And then, wasn't good against Louisiana Lafayette. And then last week against TCU, I bet Iowa State. I liked Iowa State a lot in that game. Had one of the worst interceptions, pick sixes in the history of college football. You shouldn't be making that throw as a 3-year starter. He even admitted it. Kudos for him for admitting it. That's a true freshman mistake in your 3rd game as a starter, not your 30th game as a starter. It's not getting any better. He's going to have to play out of his mind here to cover the number, in my opinion.
Well, and that's the thing about playing Big 12 football is that, look, Iowa State's got a good defense. They regularly have one of the best defenses in this conference, but this is an offense-first conference. So at some point, you got to get offense. And at some point, your quarterback has to develop for you. And Purdy hasn't done that. And you can point to Iowa State losing some skill guys over the last few years, like a Montgomery, like a Butler, stuff like that. But, even a Lazard. But the thing of it is that you got to get better at the most important position on the field. And Iowa State hasn't done that. And there's only so much you can ask of a defense in these conferences where defense isn't really played because everybody loads up on offense. And I think that's the spot that Iowa State's kind of in right now.
Yeah, he's not getting any better. And look, he's lost some guys at wide receiver. I'll admit to that, but he's got a stud at running back in Breece Hall. He's got a bunch of tight ends. Got Charlie Kohler back last week against TCU. He's one of the better tight ends in the entire country. There's enough there for him to not look as bad as he has the first couple games of the season.
One other game in the Big 12, and then we'll do a highlight video here for you. But Texas Tech and Kansas State. Kansas State, 2.5-point favorite, total in the 64 range for this one. And I want to get your thoughts on something specific here, because one of the things that, I've talked about, but as I've gotten older and matured as a handicapper and all of that, I sort of wonder how much this stuff actually matters. Kansas State is in your prototypical letdown spot. They just beat Oklahoma. They won a game they weren't supposed to win. +4 in turnover margin, as we've already discussed. Big fourth quarter comeback, all of that. They're in a letdown spot. Texas Tech blows a huge lead to Texas in just epically bad fashion, loses in overtime. So now you wonder about their mindset going into Manhattan for this game. So you've got some spots in play here. How much of your handicap is predicated on these spots, and how much of it is just looking at Team A versus Team B, and also your power ratings, and determining your pick, or if you're staying off the game because of that?
Yeah, great question. And obviously that is a spot here for both teams. Texas Tech could be a letdown because they blew a game that they absolutely could have had last week in Kansas State. Obviously, one of the biggest upsets we'll see in college football all season, I'm guessing. But I queried it, because it's the first thing that came to my mind, and I don't have the exact numbers in front of me, but it was nothing significant. How did teams do after pulling, 3 touchdown plus outright upsets? How do they do the next week? And Again, it was close to 50%. Otherwise, I would have put it in my newsletter and wrote it up specifically. Didn't see that any significance there. Pure power rating for me is 4 on this game. I'd lean Kansas State. I mean, I think they're very well coached. Texas Tech's kind of more up and down as far as I'm concerned. I actually trust more Kansas State and their style of play to be more, ready, even, I should say.
Prepared.
Ready. Yeah. So nothing that I bet, but I would certainly, again, just pure power ratings, because I think both teams, there's some questions about their motivation. I would lean towards the Wildcats.
The Chris Kleiman versus Matt Wells thing is a pretty good conversation, too. You sort of wonder about these coaches that move up from the group of 5 level where, I mean, look, Utah State had some very, very good quarterbacks. They had some very good players for that conference. Here at Texas Tech, you're probably, 7th or 8th on the pecking order relative to the other teams in the conference. So, I mean, that's an adjustment period for a lot of these coaches. And, I mean, Chris Kleiman, obviously he's got exceptional talent there at North Dakota State, but he's gone to Kansas State and done what he's supposed to do, and it's worked out really well for him.
Yeah, I mean, won 8 games last year. I thought he overachieved a year ago, and the fact of the matter is beating Oklahoma 2 years in a row, that's a pretty good feather in your cap. And I thought he inherited a worse situation as far as expectations, having to replace a legend like Bill Snyder, a Hall of Famer, one of the best, in my opinion, coaches in the history of college football. Then Matt Wells inheriting a losing program where the expectations probably weren't as high coming off of Kingsbury, and it just hasn't been overly a great look, at least so far here through 14 games.
Well, I think it's a really important point is sort of when you talk about evaluating coaches and sort of evaluating the differences between the coaches, it is a big part of the handicap, and I think in particular here this year, like we talked about at the top of the show, where these teams are very inconsistent. I mean, they're kind of all over the place. A lot of it has to do seemingly with preparation, and it always does week in and week out, but there isn't a whole lot of crispness to your offense, to your defense with the way that all this stuff is set up right now. A lot of it is based on preparation, and maybe this is the kind of year, and I'm not going to say that Kleiman's better than Lincoln Riley or anything like that. Maybe eventually he could be. I don't know if he is right now, but I think that is maybe more of a factor that we need to keep in mind here is the coaching as this season goes along.
Or you're looking for, those coaches, I couldn't get it out of my mouth, but there isn't a lot of highs and lows, sort of say. It's just, as is, keep at it each and every week. Maybe that's what you're looking for. Who knows? Again, I've never handicapped in COVID. I thought there's been some really good opportunities to be had. Some have worked out really well. Some haven't. We're going to learn a hell of a lot more here in the next at least couple of weeks. I don't think we got enough data points to make some strong, pound your fist on the table type of arguments here. But this is one where I think the reason it's 2.5 is that, general handicapping 101 says Kansas State let down. I think people are kind of missing the boat that Texas Tech might have the letdown as well.
All right, so we'll do a highlight video breakdown here on our ATS YouTube page of game 143-144, Texas A&M and Alabama. Alabama, 18-point favorite. That's the predominant number out there as we're recording here on Thursday, late morning, early afternoon, Eastern time. Total on this game, 51.5. And I encourage everyone to listen to the full editions of ATS Radio because this game is a good segue of what we just talked about, handicapping coaching, handicapping the differences between the coaches. And I think when you look at Texas A&M, and I saw this criticism a lot last week, a lot of people like the personnel for Texas A&M in College Station. They like what they're building in terms of the roster. They don't like how Jimbo Fisher is maximizing it. And you better maximize your talent when you take on Alabama.
Yeah, you do. And look, I was also part of that, pro Texas A&M, at least prior to everything that's gone on as far as COVID. But if I were to circle what's your dark horse national title contender, it would have been Texas A&M. The problem is not only what happened in the game against Vanderbilt last week, which I thought was a horrific look and is being overlooked a little bit in the national media because LSU lost and Oklahoma lost. I mean, to me, the more stunning result would have been A&M losing that game to Vanderbilt. But the team just didn't have a lot of juice in that opener. Maybe some of it was expected because Alabama's on deck, or maybe because, and this is my biggest concern with A&M right now, is they lost 4 key projected starters, including their leading receiver, one of their best tacklers, a linebacker in the middle, just opted out. And among a lot of these contending teams in college football, if you look at the top 10, 15 contending teams, there weren't a lot of opt-outs. I mean, certainly there was in the Pac-12 and those schools where the teams weren't going to play this season. That's understandable. But if you look at the contenders in the SEC, the ACC and whatnot, not a lot of opt-outs. A&M had some opt-outs. To me, what's going on in that program? A team that's expected to at least make a run for it this year, and they're opting out, that's not a good look. And what also isn't a good look here, Adam, is former Nick Saban assistants against Nick Saban. Nick Saban's never lost against a former assistant. He's 19-0.
Yeah, and he's probably not going to lose this week, certainly as the line would imply. The thing for Texas A&M is this, and this has been a problem for Jimbo Fisher dating back to Florida State, and it was one of the things that really helped lead, I would say, to Florida State's, I'm going to call it a demise, as a national power program. The offensive line play has not been good. Yep. It has not been good under Jimbo Fisher, regardless of which team he's been coaching for the last several years. And again, if there is one thing that you can ill afford to have against Alabama, it's a bad offensive line, because they will eat you alive. So my power ratings on this game are actually a little bit lower than what the market has. I think there could be a slight overreaction to A&M's performance against Vanderbilt, maybe trying not to show anything, stuff like that. But the reason why power ratings can't be a be-all, end-all, despite how much we talk about them here, is that the matchup still matters. And the matchup for A&M here in this game does not look good. It's that simple to me.
It is. And similar to you, power ratings say A&M's the play here. 15 is where I have it. But not only the matchups worry me, but the mindset of Alabama. I don't know if you've heard Saban talk. He is pissed off what happened in that final 10 minutes of the Missouri game last week. Saban usually slows things down. He has a history of doing that the last 10 years. There's a few years there where he had 2 capable quarterbacks with Hurts and Tagovailoa, that it didn't matter what he was doing offensively. They were just scoring. I think this week, if he has an opportunity to put one on Jimbo, there's going to be no let up on defense or offense. So, again, I could only bet Alabama, even though my numbers disagree with it.
Yeah, I got this one 15.5. So, it opened, the global opener at Circa was 13.5, I think.
I didn't get it. I didn't even get it. Within 2 minutes, it was down further on the card. I didn't grab it. So that shows you even a guy like me couldn't even get that 13.
But still, I guess what I'm saying here is that, you and I fall between the opening number and where the number sits now. And again, I think that there are just matchup advantages for Alabama here. I will say this, and it's not just because you and I have lower numbers, but just simply that this is a pretty big number now. I don't know if there's a great opportunity to bet pre-flop on this game, but I think this is a game, much like what we talked about last week when we discussed live betting. If you see that Alabama is doing what they want and A&M can't protect the quarterback, Alabama live is your play here.
Yep, totally agree. Again, and let me say I can only look towards Alabama right now. I'm not saying that there's value at the current number. I'm just saying my mindset. I don't want, even though my numbers are off 3 points, I don't want anything to do with A&M. And again, I think this might be one where you see more of the same. I mean, I go back to, I'm dating myself, but it's 4 or 5 years ago. There was a game where, he just put it on A&M like 59-0. I'm not saying it's going to be 59-0 here, but Saban's mindset this week is he's going to want to put one on A&M after what happened against Missouri. So I think live Alabama looks pretty good to me.
Well, no consensus pre-flop on this game, but some good handicapping advice and some handicapping tips here from myself, host Adam Burke, and also professional bettor and handicapper Brad Powers. Subscribe to our ATS YouTube page, and make sure you subscribe to ATS Radio as well, which you can get on Spreaker, Stitcher, Spotify, iTunes, iHeartRadio, Google Podcasts, wherever you stream and download your podcast content. All right, with that, Brad, we'll take a little bit of a breather here before we do our next highlight breakdown. And I want to talk about this Ole Miss-Kentucky game, because I know you liked Kentucky last week against Auburn, and quite frankly, for the most part in that game, they were the right side, but they ran into turnovers, and Auburn converted the short fields in the fourth quarter. Ole Miss gives up a boatload of yards and points to Florida. Kentucky, 5.5, 6-point favorite here. Total on the rise, 59.5 up to 61.5. Any thoughts on this one?
Yeah, I mean, numbers say slightly in Kentucky. You're right. I liked Kentucky quite a bit last week watching it. I mean, they were having their way at the line of scrimmage just like I thought. And turnovers are, that is the statistic. You can give me anything, first downs, yards, rushing, anything. Give me the turnovers. And when you're -3 and you consider that, all turnovers are not actually created equal, you talk about how impactful they were. 2 of the turnovers were inside the Auburn red zone, including the interception, whatever happened at the end of the half there, which was a total, just discombobulation. I honestly expected some SEC officials to get fired after what happened at the end of the first half in the Kentucky-Auburn game. But besides that, something that's not even in the box score as far as a turnover, a failed fake punt set up Auburn for a 27-yard TD drive. Should have won the game outright. Forget covering the spread. But usually that signifies, hey, value. I want to bet on Kentucky this week. I'm not that anxious. I liked what I saw with Ole Miss. I thought Matt Corral, their quarterback, looked very capable for Ole Miss. I know a lot of people, including myself, like Plumlee, who looks like he's the backup now, but Corral looked like he fit in that Lane Kiffin offense really well. He is mobile still, but throwing for nearly 400 yards. I didn't see much value here. If it went to 7, I'd actually bet Ole Miss.
All right, we got another highlight video breakdown for you here. Another game from the SEC on this edition of ATS Radio. Take a look at game 153, 154, Auburn and Georgia. 6.5, the prevailing number market-wide. Total of 45 on this game, which I know the Circa opener was very, very low on the Auburn and Georgia game. I know a lot of people jumped on that one, piggybacked that number up quite a bit, but let's start with the side here for this game. Georgia, again, 6.5-point favorite. Auburn, you had some questions about them last week. Do you have those same questions this week going to Athens?
I do have the same questions. Again, I thought Kentucky controlled the line of scrimmage. I think Auburn's offensive line will really struggle against this Georgia defense. I thought Bo Nix still played pretty well. They got a stud at wide receiver in Williams that basically on 2 3rd and longs, basically 4-point plays, snatched the ball on basically 50-50 balls in the end zone to get a couple touchdowns. So impressed in that regard. We'll see totally different defense here. I think Georgia's elite. Misleading final would normally, to me, Adam, say scream value on Georgia. But Georgia's game was a little bit misleading. If you're following along with live scores, middle of the third quarter, just trailing Arkansas 10-5. And there was really nothing fluky other than bad quarterback play for Georgia. They put in Stetson Bennett, who I really like. I've seen him play in a couple spring games. I think he's a gamer. He's not going to, lead you to the national title, but you can win some games in the SEC with him. And there's some scoring there, including a defensive return. But now it looks like JT Daniels might play. We're not for certain if he's going to start, how much he's going to play. Kirby Smart's really buttoned up about it this week. So there's question marks there. I bet Auburn plus. I bet 2 things on this at Circa. I bet Auburn plus 8. I didn't know about the JT Daniels situation at that point, so I thought 8 was too high. And then I did bet the over. That was way too low with 2 teams that are going to run some tempo. And Georgia was running tempo. Even though they weren't efficient, they were running some tempo early in that game against Arkansas. Right now, 6.5 is a tough number. I guess I would lean Georgia minus 6.5, even though I have an Auburn plus 8 ticket. Number for me is right around 7. So I know everybody wants to bet it. It's the game of the week. It's the biggest game we've had in college football this season today. But I don't see at the current numbers too much value. Too many question marks, too many questions and answers for me.
I do see a little bit of value on Georgia, at least relative to my numbers. I've got this one up in double digits. And, it's one of those things where you're grabbing plus 8. You think it's a good numbers grab. It's not necessarily, a strong position on the game for you. It's a numbers grab. You got through a key number with this one going down to 6.5. Again, as we talked about earlier in the show, that's all you can do is get the best of the number that you can. So I get Georgia minus 6.5. You get Auburn plus 8. And I think both of us are pretty comfortable with the numbers that we have. I don't know which one of us winds up winning the game, but I think under 7, there is some value on this Georgia team. Auburn, you talked about the concerns you had with them last week. You've got, first of all, Bo Nix is fine. I don't think he's a great quarterback by any means. And I know going on the road is a little bit different now. And Kentucky's got a good defense. I'll give them credit for that. But Georgia is a fast defense. Georgia will play with that tempo. So, they may be able to gas that Auburn defense a little bit. If Auburn doesn't stay on the field, that's how this game probably gets away from them. And they did lose, some key defensive linemen last year in the draft. They lost some other guys on defense due to graduation and other things. I think this is a good situation for Georgia. But again, it speaks to getting the best of the number. Even though we're on opposite sides, we can both respect the positions because you're north of 7, I'm south of 7, and that's all that we can really do, and then see how the game plays out.
And let's hope it lands 7.
That'd be good.
Happy,
yeah, right?
I'm happy. Everybody's happy. Except,
Everybody's happy.
Auburn Tiger fans.
Yeah, that's true. That's definitely true. And that's all you ever get in the comments for these things, too. You get the hate comments from the team.
War Eagle. You idiot. How could you go against – oh, my God. How could you go against Auburn? They're going to kill them. That's SEC fans.
In fairness, I was dead wrong on the Miami-Louisville game earlier, and we took a lot of flack from Miami fans, and they were absolutely right, so I give them credit for that. But this should be a good one here.
The comments are really that bad? I haven't looked into them yet.
No.
I get enough bad comments on Twitter.
Oh, yeah. I don't know why you have a Twitter. I've seen the things people say to you. I don't know why you have a Twitter.
Yeah, it's entertaining. Let's just put it that way.
Definitely. And it's very entertaining here on our ATS YouTube page as well with this breakdown of Auburn and Georgia. And, of course, make sure you subscribe to the full versions of ATS Radio wherever you stream and download your podcast content. All right, with that, let's transition over to the NFL side of things here, Brad. And something you and I wanted to talk about is kind of a general topic before looking at some individual games. Totals are pretty high across the board here this week.
Yeah, so the average total is like 50 and a half. I haven't done all the legwork, but that's got to be historic as far as the NFL, looking at the average week by week throughout the course of the history of it. But when your average total is 50 and a half, that's pretty significant. It's just not one game. It's multiple games in the mid-50s and teams that you don't even consider to be, pure over teams. You're dealing with a lot of mid-50s numbers. Obviously, scoring's been up in the NFL, and there's all these theories. I think a lot of them are right. The penalties, it's getting officiated totally different. I think that plays into it. No crowd noise, I think certainly helps the offense. They can hear the audibles and the adjustments and whatnot. It's not going to – I think a lot of enthusiasm and crowd noise impacts and helps the defense more than it does the offense. That makes sense to me. So, scoring's up 4 points per game. And if you've been betting overs blindly, you're winning. I'm not sure you're going to win at the same percentage this week because, to me, the adjustment has been made. These totals, are up 4 or 5 points per game on average than what I think we would have saw if these games were played week 1. I'm not going and saying, hey, there's a lot of value on the under, and I'm not betting a ton of unders this week. But if you're looking to bet a lot of overs, I just want to make this point. You are now paying a premium on that over, or at least it's certainly much better represented in the marketplace.
Well, another good point from Kyle Hunter on Monday was he mentioned that the pace, the tempo in the NFL has gotten a good bit quicker for this season, too. Teams are moving a little bit faster here this year, and I can't really confirm this, and maybe this is something I should have looked up before I say this because – there's nothing quite like being wrong in front of several thousand people. But the thing I was kind of thinking about is that maybe I wonder if third down to go yardage is a little bit lower this year too, because it feels like we're getting a lot more usage in the passing game with running backs and tight ends and these shorter passing routes. A lot of the college offensive hallmarks making their way to the NFL now because a lot of quarterbacks can complete those throws. I sort of wonder if we're just in general, getting fewer of those third and long situations because quarterbacks aren't having as many incompletions, taking deep shots or, whatever else. Seems like we're finding more mismatches of running backs against safeties, running backs against linebackers, stuff like that, to where teams are just kind of consistently moving forward a lot more than they used to with, incomplete passes or, runs for stops behind the line of scrimmage, stuff like that.
And also on to piggyback off of that, I don't follow it like some people do, but the guys that do follow the analytics say it's playing a lot more into the NFL. Maybe not all the teams, but a lot more teams are embracing the analytics, going for it on fourth down and whatnot. We're seeing more of that, and obviously that leads to more efficiency and more scoring. So all the above on why the NFL scoring's up. And I'll tell you, if it continues, the overs turn around and go like 10-6 or 11-5 this week, what are we going to see? Some totals in the 60s?
I think we probably will. And that's an excellent point about teams being more aggressive, too, because even if they don't get it, we're talking about situations where teams used to punt. So that's 20, 25, 30 yards worth of field position with that change of possession. So that's an excellent point that you mentioned there, too. And again, maybe it's something from a live betting standpoint that you can kind of look to take a little bit of advantage of. But we talk about high-scoring games, and tonight we probably won't have one between Denver and the Jets. And I hate to do this to you, but we haven't really talked about this game at any other juncture on ATS Radio this week. Jets -1. Brett Rippon gets the start for Denver. Total 40.5, 41 in that range. What do you do with what could be a complete and utter train wreck tonight?
I go under. I can't really bet each side. Obviously, the Jets +3 is a really good bet. From you talk closing line value, we'll see if it wins or not. But that's one where just missed the boat there. Shame on me for not giving that out. Is probably because I was so down on the Jets after their performances the last couple of weeks. But to me, at the current numbers, the only thing I can play, shop around, bet, go under 41.
I want to ask you about the first game on the board for Sunday here quickly. Indianapolis and Chicago, 251, 252. Chicago, steals victory from the jaws of defeat. They go to Nick Foles. Atlanta goes into the prevent defense, which not only prevents them from covering, but winds up preventing them from winning the game. Chicago is I would say, fraudulent 3-0 team that probably will upset some people, but they've had fourth quarter comebacks in 2 of their 3 wins. Detroit was just ravaged by injuries, and then of course, you get the situation here. So Indianapolis only laying 2.5 here this week, and yet something about that line doesn't smell right to me.
I'd lean Chicago. I think you get a 1-game bump with Foles. Some excitement. I'm not buying Chicago long term, but I would lean them in this way. But you're right. I still think they're fraudulent. Not only what's happened, they're the first team in the history of the NFL to have 2 come from behind wins in the fourth quarter of 16 points. And hell, they did it 2 times in a matter of 3 weeks. And nobody had ever done it in a full season before. So, the fact that they've played the teams that are combined 1-8 and the way that game flow, fraudulent. Indianapolis, looks okay. Looks good. Box scores look dominant. Defense is number 1 in the NFL, but they haven't played anybody either. Their teams are combined 1-8. So I would just lean Chicago. Here's what I did play, and I really like. I like under. Indianapolis does have a decent defense. You got to give them credit. You can only play the teams in front of you, but they've been relatively consistent. Chicago, there's been a lot of that late scoring in the fourth quarter of their games. I think some of that you could take out. So, and then maybe some weather. I was tipped off by a couple guys that's all they do is study weather. Under, I think, is pretty good here. And I bet it, and I released it.
All right, so we'll do a highlight video breakdown here of game 273, 274 between New England and Kansas City. Kansas City laying a touchdown, total 53 in this game. And this is the marquee game of week 4, I would say. And you've got such an interesting scenario here because Kansas City just completely dismantled arguably the best team in the AFC in Baltimore, and now Kansas City probably leapfrogs Baltimore in the minds of anybody who was either undecided or like the Ravens a little bit more. They just played a team where you want to try to contain the quarterback, where you want to try and keep that guy in the pocket in Lamar Jackson. Now you get Cam Newton. So Kansas City, do they really have to change anything with the game plan this week? And does that help them covering as a touchdown favorite?
Now, did you bury the lead? Didn't we do a highlight video on that Ravens-Chiefs game?
We did.
And as I recall, I was on the Chiefs.
You were?
You were on the Ravens?
I was.
I know it's your show, but I just want to, put that out there.
That's fine.
Everybody watching and listening to this. I was on the Chiefs, obviously. Good bet, or whatever. I'm against the Chiefs. I know it's so tough to go against a team that was so dominant. against a really good Baltimore team that I think, player for player might have the deepest roster. But I would be kicking myself all season if I didn't take Bill Belichick in a role that's only happened now 3 times, counting this game, 3 times in the last 18 years, and that's Bill Belichick getting a touchdown. It's only happened 2 other times. Of course, he covered in both of those. I got to take the full touchdown here. And I think New England's really good. And I think people are starting to see it a little bit more now. But I'm wondering, I think 1 yard is changing their entire perception. What would the perception, would this line be 7 if they gain 1 extra yard and win the game against Seattle and Cam Newton scores a touchdown? I don't think it's 7. I think it's 6.5. So I'll play on that 1 yard, which I played the last week in a really good spot for him. And with Kansas City off a big marquee game with 1 day less to prep, I'm going to take New England, and I also lean under. I think they run the damn football, keep Mahomes off the field, similar to what we saw the Colts do last year against the Chiefs. And I think New England's capable of running the ball. They just ran for 250 yards in an NFL game last week. So I think there's correlation here. New England and under. I like it.
Are you sprinkling the money line too?
I am a little bit. Man,
Attaboy.
I love Mahomes and Reed. I mean, it's now 12 straight wins, 11 covers. Should not be happening for a team as high profile as the Chiefs. But I love Belichick. Belichick to me that's just like going back home. 17 years of consistent winning, covering in an historic role. I got to take the full touchdown. And then, of course, what'll happen is, it'll look good early, and Mahomes 2-3 quick touchdowns, boom, bang, it's 38-21. I lose both bets.
What is your criteria for sprinkling the money line in the NFL? I mean, do you always do it with a dog that you like, or is it just in certain situations?
Obviously dogs that I like in the field goal range, I do it, quite a bit. Touchdown dogs, not as much. In this instance, where I think there could be some variance here, and it is, betting someone that's very trustworthy, in my opinion, Belichick, I'm more prone to do it. But typically, I'm not betting money line on a lot of my touchdown plus dogs that I bet.
Well, good thoughts there on this game from professional bettor and handicapper Brad Powers, and always good thoughts on our ATS YouTube page, and very good thoughts on ATS Radio as well. We encourage you to subscribe to that wherever you stream and download your podcast content. All right, Brad, before we finish up today's show, anything else in the NFL you want to touch on?
I thought it was you and I talked before, but it's a tough week, I think, this week. I struggled a little bit, both college and pro. One I do really like, and I'm a man of the people. I mean, you guys want picks. I'll give you picks. I like my favorite play in the NFL this week is Miami against Seattle. I mean, you're going to lay near a full touchdown on the road with the worst defense as far as giving up yards per game in the entire NFL in a bad spot off 2 primetime marquee wins over New England and Dallas, flying across the country, 10 a.m. Pacific start time against a Miami team that I think's okay. I mean, they proved it last week in the road win against Jacksonville. Extra time to prepare for them. I think it's not Fitz-tragic, it's Fitz-magic. You're talking about me sprinkling on the money line. I would not be stunned. Forget the plus 6.5. I wouldn't be stunned. Miami shocks the world, not me, the world. Miami outright over the Seahawks.
I don't know if you've ever heard this, but did you know that Ryan Fitzpatrick went to Harvard?
Yeah.
You knew that?
So tired of it. Yeah. 15 years.
One thing I will say here is that it looks like there's wind and rain in the forecast on Sunday down in Miami. So we'll see if that winds up.
That's another positive for me. I mean, Russell Wilson, come on. He can't be on. Can he be on like that every game?
I don't know. Maybe.
He's great, but
ask Sierra. Sierra will tell you.
Touche.
I mean, that's the thing, right? You start talking about these guys that set the bar really effing high, and they do it week after week, and you do wonder. I mean, at some point, that guy's got to have a game that's kind of pedestrian, right? Maybe it's this one.
He can't throw 5 touchdown passes, and we never see him. Maybe he can, but I mean, I think he's due for a 2 touchdown pass game instead of a 5.
And if nothing else, if you're worried about the full game, and maybe Seattle starts fast here, but again, early kickoff, so that is a concern. it's going to be
Miami
the
first
mid
half.
80s and humid, and that's not a situation Seattle's all that accustomed to either.
No.
So
I like it.
yeah, I like it too. All right, let me ask you real quickly about a couple of these games here, because we've got two 13-point underdogs in the NFL this week. Baltimore, Washington, Giants on the road at the Rams. 13 is a really large number in the NFL, and I have no interest in either one of them.
So I'm glad you asked this question. And we didn't even prepare for this. So this is me already thinking. I'm like, historically it is a loser. Double-digit road favorites. So we're talking the Baltimore game in this instance. Double-digit road favorites, long-time loser in the NFL. 47% since 1989. Not the case the last 4 years. 16-2 against the spread the last 4 years. And I mean winning these games by 23 points per game, covering by 11 points per game. They've won 18 in a row, 16-2 against the spread. So, I mean, I'm not going to bet Baltimore, but because of that, the way that trend line's going, and I know it's a smaller sample size, but again, with more plays, more analytics, and I think Baltimore coming off a loss, I'm not betting Washington. The Rams, it's just not double-digit road favorites. It's double digits everywhere. And, you go the last 6 years, 62% double-digit favorites in the NFL. I mean, normally it's always dog or pass. I'm no longer dog or pass. It's mainly just pass for me when it comes to these. I should be betting the favorite.
I guess the one caveat I would throw on that is that a lot of those are probably late in the season where teams are, kind of folding it in a little bit.
Point.
But also too, I mean, I think Washington battles. The Giants, I don't know what the hell they do the rest of the year without Saquon Barkley.
I bet them last week. That was so.
You weren't the only one.
Preseason team. The 49ers trotted out a preseason team and whipped their ass.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know how you trust the Giants here this week, but again, 13's a pretty massive number there for a Rams team, not in a real great spot either. Coming off of losing a game that they probably shouldn't have. That PI call was very iffy against Buffalo. The big comeback in the second half. Now they go back home in a spot where they're supposed to roll. Sometimes, it's hard when you're supposed to beat a team by margin to get up for that game.
Yep.
So we'll see if the Rams are able to do that in that one, in that new SoFi Stadium, which, by the way, looks absolutely gorgeous. And I can't wait to see some bigger events there down the line in that stadium, and also see, fans at things again. But in any event, professional handicapper and bettor Brad Powers from bradpowersports.com. What's going on over at the website right now, buddy?
Talk about it each week. It's my newsletter. Game write-ups, every single college game, every single NFL game. I always say this, and I'll say this till the day I die. Buy it for the info, not for the picks, but I get it. Everybody wants picks. Picks are winning. 10-6, 62.5%. I mean, that doesn't sound great. It's a short sample size, but, 57% over 6 years, that's not too bad. I wish I put a hell of a lot more money on all these games. If I had to do it, hindsight's always 20/20, I would have done it. But, again, buy it for the info, not for the picks. Power ratings, write-ups, college, pro. Get it now, $79 for the entire season, college and pro.
Over at bradpowersports.com. And make sure you follow Brad on Twitter at Brad Powers and the number 7. By the way, I don't know how many people do this, but you can follow me on Twitter too, at Skating Tripods. But Brad, always a pleasure, my friend. Thank you so much for joining me. Really appreciate it. And the headset looks good on you, and we'll talk to you again next week.
All right. Thanks, buddy.
There you go. There's professional handicapper and bettor Brad Powers from bradpowersports.com. I'll be back on Friday with my picks, if I can figure out 5 of them, for week 4 in the Circus Sports Million. 9-5-1 to start the year, and coming off of a disappointing 2-3 week, hopefully get a bounce back here in week 4. That'll do it for me. Thank you so much for listening, everybody, and I will talk to you again tomorrow.